Hey everybody, I am Carolyn Byers. I'm the Education Director at Madison Audubon, and today I am here to talk to you about feeder birds. Let me see, I am on our Facebook page now, so I can see any questions or comments that you have, so send them my way so I can answer them while we're still live. And if you're watching this when it's not live, you feel free to type in your comments anyway, and we'll try to get back to you. All right, so usually I am out in the community teaching at schools and community centers. I usually see about 300 kids a week. And in the summer, we still partner with all of our local community centers like Bayview and Vericourt and Salvation Army in Goodman and Lusher. But this year we are keeping things virtual. Our virtual summer camp starts on Monday, and there is still time to sign up if you're interested. And we're going to continue programming like this. So I'm glad that you're all tuning in. I am just going to try one more time to find the comments over here on my computer, so I can see exactly what y'all are asking. Totally. Here we go. Got it. Okay, type your questions in. I'm ready for you. So today we're going to talk about feeder birds. And these are just birds that are really common in neighborhoods and cities, and that would come to your bird feeder. So if you have questions about birds that don't necessarily eat at a bird feeder, I am more than happy to answer those, but I'm going to focus on ones from our bird feeders today. And the first thing I want to share is that Project Feeder Watch and Cornell have a really amazing web page that I'll link below later, and it lets you select different types of food or different types of feeders that you might share with your birds, and it tells you what birds that'll attract. So if you're interested in finding out if you add, mealworms out to your yard, what kind of birds you might attract, that's a great website to visit because it lets you play around with all the different variables and see what little changes you can make in your yard to get more birds there. So that's a pretty cool website. And so let's talk about the main things that people usually feed. And I guess we should back up to the main feeders too. So there are bird feeders that have a long cylinder tube and little posts on the sides. Those are mainly good for finches, and a lot of people put, it's either called thistle or niger seed. You can put those seeds in there. Great for finches, goldfinches, house finches, maybe purple. A few other species will go to those too. Those are awesome. You can have a platform bird feeder that will attract ground feeding birds like juncos and grackles and sometimes red-winged blackbirds, which are really cool. Starlings will also come to those. I know a lot of people don't love grackles and starlings, but I think they're really neat. And then there's your typical bird feeder that has, a container in the middle, possibly platforms, possibly a perch on either side. And those hold all kinds of wonderful things like black oil sunflower, white striped sunflower seeds. You can have mixes with peanuts in it, or millet, or just a huge variety. And then my favorite, the suet feeder. I love getting woodpeckers and chickadees on my suet feeders. So type in the comments. Let me know what kind of feeders you have, what kind of feed you're feeding. Some really common questions I get in the office are, why haven't the birds found my feeder yet? And why are my birds gone? They were eating at my feeder. So the first one, both of them are a little bit tricky. And the first question, why haven't they found my feeder yet? It just takes birds some time to move through the landscape and discover a new food source. So if it's a new bird feeder that you've just set up, give it a few weeks, maybe a month before you really start to get worried. Sometimes they find it right away. Sometimes it takes a little longer. And sometimes if there's a really good food source nearby, they might not need to hunt for it. So if you have a neighbor with 15 bird feeders, even if they have 3 bird feeders, it might take them a little longer to find your bird feeder. And that sort of is the same same answer to why have they left? It depends on the landscape and what's going on around it. So maybe a really great natural food source just opened up. Like say there's, some restored prairie in a park a block over from you, and now it's later in the season and all of the flowers have gone to seed. Maybe all those birds that were coming to your feeder are going to a natural food source. Birds are so good at finding food in the wild. They don't necessarily need our food unless there's a crazy weather event happening. It's easy for them. It's like opening a bag of chips for us. It's easy food. So be patient with your bird feeders. So I see some people in the questions asking stuff. Is it okay to have a feeder in the shade surrounded partially by a bush? Yeah, that sounds like a great spot for a feeder. Depending on how high the bush is, you might get more squirrels or raccoons or other animals visiting your feeder. But honestly, it's hard to keep those animals out anyways, unless you're really strategic about where you put it. So yeah, bird feeder in the shade surrounded by a bush sounds great. Mandy asks, what do grackles not like besides safflower? What do grackles not like? Well, they eat a lot of things. I think that maybe if you fed exclusively suet, you would get fewer grackles. I think they would still eat it, but the suet feeder that's dangling is a little bit harder for them to get to because they don't like to hang out upside down as much. They're not as nimble as some other birds. So if you're really opposed to grackles in your yard, I would switch to only suet. Mandy says, safflower is growing in my yard and I would prefer to not keep it growing. Well, that is definitely a hazard of having a bird feeder. Your seeds will germinate. I have quite a few volunteer sunflowers in my yard this year. So I think that's something you just have to balance, whether you like the birds more than you dislike weeding. So you can do a few things. You could choose to put your bird feeder somewhere where it's likely that most of the seed won't fall on fertile ground. So you could mulch really heavily underneath your bird feeder, or put down wood chips, or put it somewhere on a hard surface. That would be a good thing to do. You could also keep your bird feeder. Mine is on a post in the middle of my lawn, so that I can just mow right around it. So that's a really, really great way to keep down any plants you don't want growing. Let's see. Someone else says they have several tube feeders and a couple of suet feeders. Also have a couple cage feeders. Great variety of birds that visit. That does sound like a great variety. Good work with all your feeders. How to keep moths from getting into your birdseed bags of food. I use clothespins, but they still get in. I think the best way to keep things out of your birdseed that you don't want is to put them in metal or very strong plastic containers. And metal works best if you want to keep out rodents as well. So I don't think there's any great way to keep them out of the regular bags of birdseed. Sorry about that. Okay, so I am going to read one more question and then I'm going to jump back onto giving you some facts about the birds themselves, okay? So someone else says, I have a few Niger sock feeders, but not a ton of finches eat from them. How long should I leave them hanging out there before they go bad? Will they mold? That's a great question. So birdseed definitely will mold and it will get old. So I think the best thing to do is just open up that sock and check it out and see if the seed looks and smells like it should. And if it does, then I would say you can keep it up. But if it seems off, then that's probably why the birds aren't coming to it. And that's also what I ask people when they say, my birds, they haven't been coming to my feeder. They used to, but now they're not. Maybe something happened. There was a big rainstorm and, the seed got wet and has started to mold. And that's why the birds have stopped now. Or maybe another food source opened up and while the birds were away and not eating, all of that seed went bad. So it is a really good first place to start if you're having trouble getting birds at your feeder, to check on whether or not the seed is fresh and just replacing it. Okay, cool. I see another person ask, my bird seed is from last year and they won't eat it. Yeah, I would try different seed. Buy some new seed. You can also set the seed you have out on cookie sheets if you want, or just sprinkle it in the grass, and squirrels and chipmunks might go for it. And if they're not going for it, then you definitely want new seed, because then it's squirrels love seed. So if they're not eating it, it's probably bad. All right, so we talked a lot about what types of food you can put up, what types of feeders. The other thing I want to add about feeders is it's really good to think about where you're placing your feeder. So someone did ask if in the shade near a bush was fine. That's great. You're thinking about where your feeder is going. It's really important to think about how far away from windows your feeders are. So I saw somewhere, I think either Cornell or National Audubon has some really good advice on this on their website. And I saw that much too close to a window is, very close to a window is okay, because then the birds can see that it is glass. Further, like far away from a window is also okay, because the birds won't be near the glass. There's a mid-range though, and I don't know what that distance is. That is, it's a dangerous distance for the birds, because it's far enough away that they don't immediately see the glass, but it's also far enough away that they can pick up some speed as they're flying, so that they also won't see the glass when they get closer to it. So be really aware of that. And also stand near your bird feeder and look at the windows in your house at different times of the day, because windows are reflective. It's not just that they look like they're clear and birds could fly through them, but it's also that they'll reflect whatever's on the outside of the glass. So if at a certain time of the day the light hits it just right and it reflects back all of the lovely garden plants you have, or the tree in your front yard, it'll look like to a bird that they can fly into that foliage. So check that out. It's really, really good to be aware of, and you'll save some bird lives. All right, so let's start talking about some birds, right? So I want to first, so I said I would stick to birds that come to your bird feeder, but I lied. The first bird I want to talk about is a robin, because they're everywhere. And while I don't see them on my feeder, I see them in my yard all the time. So everybody, we've got the American robin, right? This is an adult male, and they have that brick red breast, dark grayish black head, and a slate gray body. And the female, this also says pale adult, but it is a female, they have a lighter gray head. So you can tell the male and the female apart usually, especially if they're next to each other. So that's a cool thing that I didn't learn. Well, I had liked birds for a while before I learned that you could tell robins apart. The males have the dark head and the females have a grayer head. And the little juveniles, we're going to be seeing them soon too. All their little spotted breasts, they're so cute. And they have that big, big gape. So I also want to remind everybody that if you see a baby bird on the ground, it doesn't necessarily mean that it needs help, okay? If it has some feathers on it, and it's able to move through the grass and flutter a little bit, and it might just be hunkered down because it's scared of you, those are birds that you can take a step back and make sure that the parents are still monitoring it, and then just leave it alone. Keep your cats and your dogs out of your yard. Keep your cats out of your yard all the time. And just let parents handle it. This is called the fledgling stage, when they move around the environment, but they're still not very good at flying yet. It's an important stage. If the babies have no feathers at all, then that might be a good time to call a wildlife specialist. All right, so I want to share with you a robin nest. This is a picture of a robin nest, and I actually have a nest. If you check out our nest videos, that was another YouTube video I did, or Facebook Live. I show you a robin's nest, and robin's nests are really easy to identify. They're about this big around. It looks like you could fit a softball in the middle of it. They're very deep. They're very sloppy and messy. And they often build them on human structures. So you can see them on porches or gutters or your lights that are on your house. And the other really cool thing about them is that first the female will build like the basic outer cup structure, and then she will carry mud to the nest with her beak, and she'll put it in the nest and pack it around the edges of it. So there's a cup of grass, and then there's a little cup of mud inside of that. Usually you can see the ring of mud around the top. And then she builds this another little nest inside of that one using much finer grasses that are very snuggly for the chicks. So this is the robin's nest. And they can, of course, build them in trees too, or in grasslands. But that mud ring, that mud cup, is really indicative of a robin's nest. So if you ever see one with that mud ring, you got a robin. All right, so if you have questions about robins, now's the time for asking. But I want to share that, so we all know robins have lovely blue eggs, and there can be some variation there. Sometimes they're a little paler, sometimes they're very bright blue. But they have blue eggs. Usually they lay about 4, can be a little less or a little more. But the super cool fact about robins is that they usually start incubating after the 2 eggs are laid. So they don't wait for the full clutch to be laid before they start incubating. And this means that 2 of the chicks are older than the chicks that come later. And so they usually hatch, those 2 chicks hatch first, and then since the eggs are laid 1 a day, they will hatch 1 a day after that. And so they have a built-in runt or 2 of their nest. And that might seem a little, I don't know, fulfilling the quote that's like nature is red in tooth and claw or something like that. Because they're basically saying if a chick needs to die, it's going to be the younger ones. Like if there's not enough food, if I can't feed everybody, that's the one that's going to go. But it also means that they're pretty much guaranteed, as long as no predators come by, to have 2 very healthy, strong chicks, because chicks are very honest in the way they beg for food. So if they're hungry, they're begging, their mouth is open. And the chicks that beg harder and longer are the ones that get the food. So those 2 stronger chicks that hatched earlier, they're going to be constantly begging for food until they're full, and then they close their mouths. And so once they're done begging, then the other chicks will get food too. So if there's more than enough food, if it's a really good year, all of those chicks will survive. And they often do, because 4 chicks is not too much for an adult bird to handle. But if it's a bad year and there's not enough food, then those 2 chicks that are big and strong, they will be constantly begging for food. They'll keep getting it. And the other two will starve. But that means they will have a successful nest. They will raise 2 chicks. And that is so cool. So they have a plan for what happens if it's a struggle year. And I think that's neat. All right. So what else about robins? So someone asks, are robins the birds that sing at the crack of dawn? I do hear them singing early, but I hear cardinals at 4 a.m. I like cardinals, but I don't like them at 4 a.m. So usually I hear cardinals and house sparrows first. And then after that, I think robins start in with the rest of the birds, like chickadees and some other sparrows. So if you're hearing birds early in the morning, I wouldn't necessarily go pointing fingers at the robin first. Although maybe you like them really early. I usually like them too, but I have a toddler and I don't sleep as much as I should. So I don't like them at 4 in the morning. Let's see. Jenny says, I saw a squirrel go into our robin nest. Is there a way to discourage squirrels without harming squirrels or the nest? The answer is no. So that's just a part of nature. I have a robin nest. It seems like the same robin. They keep nesting in the same place under my back porch every year, and every year crows get the chicks. And so there's really not much you can do, especially since, robins aren't cavity nesters. There's no way you can exclude them from it. I suppose if there was some way to put a baffle on whatever the nest was in, you could try to keep the squirrels out that way. But squirrels are pretty crafty and they're pretty good at getting where they want to be. And especially since usually I see robins nesting in places where there are several access points, like especially if it's on a human structure, you can't block the whole thing off. So I'm sorry they're going after your robins, but keep in mind that maybe that squirrel is feeding young too. So that's kind of a win for them. Okay. Any more questions about robins? Kind of lost my train of thought there. So we have, let's see, we talked about nesting robins and how they have an asynchronous hatching. I like that. All right, I think that's good on robins. What should our next bird be? I think we should talk about blue jays because they're so sassy. Where's my blue jay in here? There we go. This is a blue jay. So I can show you, well, here's a picture of a blue jay. I think most people know what those look like. These ones, to the best of my knowledge, are sexually monomorphic, meaning that both the male and the female look the same. You cannot tell them apart. And they build a really fabulous stick nest. I love nests. I think all nests are fabulous. So this one is a pretty big stick nest. To me, it looks really, really messy. You know, all the branches extend way beyond the edges of the nest. And this book says they commonly lay 4 to 5 eggs, and they are a brownish color with brown spots on them, which is interesting because I think a lot of corvids have bluish greenish eggs. That's pretty neat. Has a slight gloss. Okay, cool. So these blue jays will nest usually in the crotch or outer branches of a coniferous or deciduous tree 5 to 50 feet above the ground. That's a huge range, but it's typically 10 to 25 feet. I see blue jays around a lot, and I think they're pretty awesome. They make a lot of different noises, and they are they're just really, they're smart and they're sassy and they're cool. And some people think they're bullies and they don't like them at their bird feeders, but I really love them. You can attract lots of blue jays if you have peanuts. They love peanuts. Let's see. Questions. A crow took a loud crying juvenile blue jay from my backyard as its parents were chasing it frantically. Yes. Yes. Crows are loud and blue jays are loud, and when one steals from the other, it is just very loud. And actually, I think it's pretty impressive that the crows did steal a blue jay chick, because blue jays are aggressive and their parents will defend their chicks. So that's another one of those things where you feel for the blue jays, because that's pretty sad, especially if it was a loud, large juvenile. They had a lot of time invested in that chick. But also the crows, they're probably feeding chicks too, and crow chicks, they're cute too. Okay, blue jays. We know we want to feed them peanuts. They are really smart, being corvids. So corvids are groups that include crows and ravens, all the jays. They're just exceptionally smart. And I don't know that I have a lot of stories about blue jays to share right now, except this is a good one. So I've done some bird banding years ago when I wore more of a scientist hat and less of an educator hat. And blue jays are really fun because once you catch it and you're all done banding it and you're ready to release it, you can lay it on its back in your hands and it will just hold its feet together like this and lay perfectly still. And just putting it on its back quiets it, and it'll just lay there until you maybe give it a little bounce, and then it'll flip over and fly away. But I think that's really fun. Let's see. Someone says, I haven't had any blue colored birds at my feeders. I really want to see that color out there. Anything to attract blue jays or bluebirds? Yes, peanuts for blue jays for sure. And they make some really cool peanut feeders if you're interested. One is it looks like a giant wreath. It's just a coil of wire that goes around in a wreath shape that you hang. And the coils are just big enough that it'll allow you to jam peanuts into it. And so they'll hold the peanuts and the blue jays can work the peanuts out, but they look really cool. And then bluebirds. Bluebirds are more common in maybe big grassy meadows, grassy fields, prairies, the edges of forests. So you kind of have to have the right habitat for them. But you could definitely add, what are the mealworms during migration, and you would be more likely to get bluebirds that way. You could also try for indigo buntings. We had one of those during migration, and it was just at our seal feeder with black oil sunflower seed. So it's kind of hit or miss for the other ones, but blue jays for sure. If you just had peanuts, go for it. Someone says, I once saw a hawk snag a blue jay that was sitting on my fence. The hawk was completely silent as it swooped down. It was sad but cool. Yes, I feel the exact same way. Sad, but so cool to see. So it was probably a Cooper's hawk or a sharp-shinned hawk. And maybe you know what kind of hawk it was, but those are the two that are most likely to try and eat birds. They're accipiters, and they have very long tails, and they're very agile, so they can chase birds while they're flying, which is so cool. Yeah, that was a neat sighting. Thank you for sharing that with us. Should we talk about chickadees next? I like chickadees. Let me find them in here. Chickadees are one of my favorite birds. I was helping out with a winter bird foraging project, and I had to go out and band birds at bird feeders. And it was in the winter, and it was like 12 degrees out, and I had this huge backpacking pack on of all of my gear, and I would get it set up, and then I would just have to sit and wait for the birds. And the chickadees were always the first ones that I would hear. So I would hear them up in the tops of the trees, and on these super cold winter days that were just frigid. And when I heard the chickadees coming, I knew that things were about to get exciting and I would see birds. So I really love chickadees for that reason. Chickadees are fun. I know that there's different opinions on this, but chickadees are one of those birds that you can try to feed by hand. I did it as a kid and I thought it was pretty wonderful. And I think that as long as, you know, you're being smart and respectful about it, that's something you could do. So people try to get closer and closer to the bird feeder with seed in their hand, and it just sort of acclimates birds to your presence, and you can try to feed them from your hand. So we have our little black-capped chickadee. There's a picture of it. They are cavity nesters, which means they nest in holes. So this nest here was built inside a tree stump. And I'm very curious about the way they got these pictures for this book. Like, was this an active chickadee nest that they just sawed in half and said, well, good luck, guys? I'm hoping it was an old chickadee nest and they had eggs that they had collected, you know, scientifically years ago that they placed in there. We'll see. Anyways, so they're cavity nesters. They'll use old woodpecker holes. They will also nest in nest boxes. You got to make sure it's the right diameter, though. They're a little bit bigger than wrens, or maybe they are the wren size. I forget. I've also heard that chickadees like to remove something from a nest box. So if you're hoping for a chickadee, add a little sawdust to it because it's part of their nesting ritual to pull stuff out of the nest to get it ready. So if there's nothing to pull out, they might be less likely to visit. So, all right, let's see. This says, it also says they nest in holes made by the birds themselves in soft, rotting wood of a dead stump. So they will also excavate their own hole, which is super cool. That's neat. I didn't know that. That's cool. It's typically 4 to 10 feet above the ground, so not too high. And I have found a few chickadee nests just by watching where chickadees were going. And I've seen them, those nests were pretty easy to find because they were in like the knot on a tree where a branch had fallen off, like gotten sick or diseased, and the tree closed it off. So they had excavated that hole right where the tree branch was. And that was a pretty cool find. It says they have 5 to 10 eggs, commonly 6 to 8. 10 is a lot of eggs for a bird this size. And they incubate for 12 to 13 days. That's kind of cool too. So on the incubation time for birds depends a lot on the species and the habitat. So grassland birds, like the different sparrows, meadowlarks, bobolinks, those things, they will incubate for about, 7 to 10 days. Maybe 10 is more common. And that's partly because their nests are so vulnerable because they're laid right on the ground. And so they really got to get those chicks out fast because the longer they're in the nest, the greater the chance is that they'll be predated. Cavity nesting birds, they are a little bit safer. Their nests are a little bit better hidden. Their predators would have to be able to get into the tree, so they have to be flighted or be able to climb in order to be able to find them. And they would have to be able to get into the hole. So these birds can take a little bit longer with their incubation time. It's kind of neat. Same with how long the chicks stay in the nest. So chickadees, it's 12 to 13 days for incubating, which still is really fast. They go from a fresh egg 13 days to hatching. That's cool. So chickadees are super fun to watch at your bird feeders. They have dominance hierarchies. So there are some chickadees that are tougher than the others, and when they fly into the feeder, the other ones will leave. Or if they're at the feeder, those chickadees will, other ones won't join them. And there's a lot of papers you can read on this. If you're interested, go to Google Scholar and look up chickadee dominance hierarchies. It's pretty sweet. I'm such a nerd. Chickadees also cache food. And, a lot of other birds do this too. Nuthatches, jays and crows do this. But chickadees, since they're so common, it's really easy to watch this behavior. So when they cache food, they're saving it for later. And so they'll usually, they will take a seed to a pretty close location. They'll either eat it right at the bird feeder or they'll go to a very close location and eat it. But if they fly further than that, they're likely caching it. So they're already full and they're going to save some of this food for later. They could be flying it back to young, but usually they feed their chicks invertebrates, a lot of protein in insects. So keep an eye on those chickadees and what they're doing when they're feeding. Oh, my computer turned off. I'm plugged into the computer, but I wonder if it's plugged into the wall. Oh, there we go. It's back. I can see your comments. Awesome. Full battery. We're good to go. All right. What else about chickadees? So their call, or their song rather, they say chickadee-dee-dee-dee-dee, right? And if they say chickadee-dee, they are just sharing that this is their territory, this is their place. But the more D's they add, the angrier they are. So if you hear chickadee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, that is an angry chickadee. And you can also look around to see what might be making them so grumpy. And a lot of feeder birds will mob predators. So if you have a hawk in the neighborhood, chickadees and blue jays and cardinals will surround the hawk. They'll yell at the hawk, sometimes dive bomb it. But all those little birds will also do the same thing to blue jays if the blue jays are getting too close to their nest. So if you hear grumpy birds, look around because there's probably some cool behavior going on. All right, if you have chickadee questions, type them in. Let's see, we have some more questions. How do we attract warblers? That's a good question. Warblers don't often come to feeders. Sometimes during migration, you might get some with mealworms, but mostly they're all insectivores, and so they like live insects. So the best way to attract warblers is to put in native plants, or even if it's not native plants, make your yard a really bug-friendly place. So obviously don't use any chemicals on your lawn or your plants to, whatever you use those chemicals for. Make it really natural. And you can also plant a lot of things that will attract insects. So native prairie plants are really great for that. And National Audubon has a plant database. I have a lot of things I need to remember to link for you later. I'm going to try to remember them all. I'll toss that in the comments. But that's a really cool resource. You can just type in your zip code, and I think what kind of plant you're looking for, either a flower, a bush, a tree, and it will give you a whole list of things that are native to your area. And it will tell you what birds they'll attract. So you can also say, I want warblers. What plants do I need? And so that's a super good resource. Another thing that makes some people roll their eyes is adding water to your yard. So if you add even just a regular bird bath, obviously keep it clean so there's nothing growing in it, and make sure mosquitoes aren't laying eggs in it. But adding water to your yard is a really great way to attract lots of species, especially the ones that don't eat birdseed. They also make a fair number of options for, like, if you want running water or They have heated water for in the winter. That's an awesome way to bring more birds to your yard. Okay, so that was the question on warblers. Mandy wants to discuss mourning doves. Yeah, I like mourning doves. I think they're great. They are not a bird that I typically think of as a feeder bird, although they do hang out under feeders a lot. They're more ground foraging birds, and they will eat, they eat a lot of millet. I don't think I see a lot going after black oil sunflower, but they are lovely. And I have a banding fact for you. Their feet, so usually when you're holding birds, at least the birds that I banded, they're all passerines, near passerines, very small, a lot of warblers and sparrows. So mourning doves are like, they're a handful of bird. When you're holding one, you really know you've got it in your hand. And I feel a lot, with those tiny birds, I feel very aware of not wanting, obviously I don't want to hurt them, but like they're just so delicate. But mourning doves feel pretty solid. I like that. And their legs and their feet and their toes are also just so much thicker than warblers and sparrows. To me, it looks like they've been covered in Play-Doh. Like they're just a little chunkier, and I love them. I love their feet so much. They're great. So mourning doves are one of my favorite nesters. And by that, I just mean I really like all their behavior around their nest and the nest itself. So I studied grassland bird nesting ecology for my master's thesis, and we got a few mourning doves out on the prairies, and I'm looking for their nest in my book here. I might have to go to the index. You all know how I feel about going to the index. It feels like a failure. I should just know right where they are. Anyways, we got a few of them nesting on the prairies, and their chicks, when they're in the nest, they usually have two. And the chicks, to me, they look like little ducks because they have just big beaks on just a little chick face. Here's what their nest looks like. It's a very loose nest, and mourning doves get a lot of flack because their nests are not very structurally sound, and sometimes they put them in places that are not very wise. So they do run into trouble with eggs falling through the bottoms of their nest. Details. But the chicks, when they're in the nest, they'll sit head to toe facing opposite directions, partly to watch for predators, probably because it's comfortable. But let's see. They will nest in open woods, evergreen plantations, orchards, roadside trees, suburban gardens, a lot of places. Also the prairies. This didn't have that. They can nest as high as 50 feet. That's crazy, but average 10 to 25 feet. They also do build nests on the ground if they're in a prairie. And they have white eggs. And usually the female is hunkered down pretty tight on them. Let's see. Yeah, they usually have 2 eggs. That's it. They're white and unmarked. They are incubated by both sexes. That's lovely. And they hatch in 13 to 14 days. Pretty cool. What else? Mourning dove is a really good call to know because they are always calling in urban areas. And they sound a little like owls. So some people do think they're owls, and it's just a fun fact to share with people. So they sound like ooh, 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 just on and on, singing like that, nice and sweet. All right, so that was mourning doves. What else should we do? Let's do goldfinches. Those ones are pretty interesting. They build lovely little nests. Goldfinches will come to a lot of feeders. Black oil sunflower is what we feed and what I see them on. They would also come to a finch feeder with thistle seed. And goldfinches, most birds, they nest early on in the spring, right when that big influx of food happens. So a lot of birds feed their young insects. Most of them feed their young insects. And so when that big insect hatch happens in early spring, that is a great time to have super hungry chicks. that need feeding. So goldfinches actually feed their chicks thistle seeds. And so they don't nest until late July or August. They're one of the latest nesting birds, maybe the latest nesting bird in our area. And they build just lovely little cup nests. They're so beautiful. This is another one that I have an example of in that nest video. The cups are about that wide, or big in diameter. And they are lined with lovely white fluffy thistle down. And so they put the thistle in their nest, they feed it to their chicks. And I just love that they nest so late and that there's a cool reason for it. Let's see. Oh yes. I'm just scanning through the notes in this book, and it says that nests found after young have left are identified by a thick rim of excrement left by the fledglings, which is a very fancy way of saying that those chicks make a poop waterfall over the side of their nest. It's really gross. So most birds, their chicks will produce something called a fecal sac. And it looks like just a little bubble it's a little white bubble. And it's the poop inside of a sac. And yes, I've touched them. I've felt them. I've squished them around a little. And they feel like, remember bath oils when those were a thing? They feel like those little, like, I don't know, capsules of bath oils, I guess. It's just like a very, it feels about like a balloon, maybe, if you filled it with Jell-O, I guess. Look at all those examples, just very accurate, right? And so the chicks produce these because having poop at your nest will make it smelly. It'll attract bugs and predators, and you don't want that if you're a chick that can't fly and can't really run. And so these fecal sacs make it really easy for parents to either eat them, fun fact, or carry them away from the nest. And it just keeps things a lot cleaner. Goldfinches don't produce those fecal sacs. So the chicks all basically pick one edge of the nest, and they're not very accurate with it. So if, you're dividing this like a clock, it would be like 1/4 of it. That side is the side that they all poop at. So they all put their little bums over the edge and poop, and it all accumulates on the edge of that nest. And it's just this waterfall of poop cascading over the edge. It's delightful. So if you're going to go out photographing goldfinch nests, first of all, always maintain your distance and make sure you're respecting the bird and not stressing them out. But also make sure you get there before the poop waterfall. Otherwise, it will just not be as picturesque. So Sharon asks, what was the reason that finches nest so late in the year? It's because they time it with thistle. The thistle flowers are not producing seeds, which is what they primarily eat, until later on in the season. And that's what they feed their chicks. So goldfinches will eat all kinds of other seeds during the rest of the year, but they feed their chicks the thistle. And they use the down for building their nest too. Okay, so that was the goldfinch. What else do I want to say about goldfinches? I like them. Who else has questions? Type in questions about goldfinches. Tim says he had doves nesting on my fireplace vent and was out watching every morning. Seemed like it took forever them to hatch. 2 babies. Wish I could share my pics. Yes, Tim, put your pics in the comment. We'd love to see them. I'm glad you were watching to see when they would hatch, though, because it is good to let them do their thing before you use your fireplace. And yeah, it's very, when you look at the numbers and you say, well, gosh, they hatch in 12 days and then fledge in another 12, that's really fast when you're thinking about a chick leaving the nest. My kid's only 3 and it obviously has been wonderful, but we've got a long way to go. But it can be a very long time if they've nested on your front porch and you can't use it, or, if they've nested for some reason under your canoe and you want to move that. That's almost a month. That's a long time to wait for a bird to finish nesting. So thank you for giving that bird its space while it was happening. Oh yeah. So someone asked, sock feeders might become more active later this summer. They might, but the goldfinches will still eat them all year round. So I think you should also check whether or not the seed has gone bad. before just deciding to put them back up later this season. But you're right, they might become more active later this summer. Because when they're feeding their chicks, they're definitely going to look for an easy food option. Okay, let's see. It is 1:16. We probably have time for one or two more birds. Any requests? I think I am going to, let's go look up a cardinal because they are pretty lovely too. So we've got the northern cardinal here. That's what they look like. They're pretty common. Most people know what they look like. The males are bright red. The females are a lovely brownish peachish shade. And she's got little peach armpits, which is so nice. They do both have the bright orange beak though. And these birds are very common feeder birds. And I love them. They're nice. They have a beautiful song and they do sing at 4 a.m. They sing throughout the day too. And I get a lot of cardinals feeding black oil sunflower seeds. They are, of course, a type of finch. And so they have that really big, strong bill that has evolved to crack seeds. So they can handle some pretty tough stuff. Also, that beak is really good at biting fingers if you happen to be trying to band them. The female especially will bite and sort of go back and forth and like chew your finger, which is unfortunate if you're trying to take some measurements on them. I know a guy who was banding them and he was ready to release the female and he just opened his hand and she just bit his thumb and held on and was just hanging from his thumb for long enough to say, hey, let's take a picture. And he's got a picture of this bird hanging from his hand because it was just so angry with him that it wouldn't let go and fly away. So it says that cardinals mostly nest in thickets, forest edges, suburban gardens, parks, and in deep forests, typically shunned. Shunned by whom? But they like to nest in dense shrubbery or coniferous trees. And it says they're typically below 10 feet high. So it's pretty easy to find them. And a lot of shrubs that are used in landscaping are really good cardinal nesting habitats. And they build a pretty loose nest. So a lot of these nests that I'm showing you, they look fairly similar. I mean, the eggs are different, but this looks a bit like a field sparrow nest. I know we haven't talked about that one yet. So it is always a good idea if you find a nest to, of course, back away from it and give it space, but also to not just take a picture of the nest and say, I got all the information I need. It's a really good idea to wait until a parent returns to the nest so that you can confirm who made it, because you can't always tell just by the nest shape and the eggs. Let's see, what else? 2 to 5 eggs, commonly 3 to 4. And they have grayish, bluish, greenish, whitish, dotted, spotted. It sounds like a Dr. Seuss book. They have a lot of different colored eggs, apparently. And they normally have 2 to 3 broods during the summer and rarely 4. We didn't talk about that yet. So birds, if their nest is destroyed or their chicks don't live, predators got to it, they will renest pretty immediately. And many birds will also just renest after their chicks have fledged. So robins can have 2 or 3 nests during a summer if all goes well and they're able to, bring those chicks off. But some birds it's just their life history that they will have many, many clutches during the summer, like the robin. And it's surprising that cardinals can have up to 4. That's a lot. That's very quick. And I think part of that is because cardinals don't migrate. They're here year round, and so they can get a very quick head start, and they can, push it a little later because their chicks don't have to be big enough to make a big migration. They can just make sure they're big enough to survive the winter. Let's see. We have a lot of things in the comments. Sharon says, so what I hear is I don't have to weed the thistle because we want the finches to feed their babies. Yes, definitely. We do the same. We are those neighbors. um, Someone says hummingbirds, rose-breasted grosbeaks. Those are suggestions for birds we should talk about next. We can do that. And then someone asks, is there a preferred feeder for cardinals or ones you don't recommend? No, cardinals are pretty easy to please. They will come to most feeders. Obviously not suet. That's not really something that they do. But I believe they don't tend to forage as much on the ground. So you want something that's higher. But we have a feeder that is an elevated platform feeder, and they come to that. So they can forage on the ground for sure. Really, I think it's more the seed type for cardinals. Some type of sunflower seed is very good for them. Cool. So hummingbirds and rose-breasted grosbeaks. Did you see a rose-breasted grosbeak on this page and wanted it? Because they're right on the next page for cardinals. I actually don't know a ton about grosbeaks and their habits. We've had one on our feeder this year. It was a male. It was during a big rainstorm. It was a very grumpy bird. I'm very happy to have the roof of the bird feeder and all the seed. It says that they generally nest in the fork of a deciduous tree or shrub, and they're usually 10 to 15 feet high. The nests are often so flimsy that the eggs may be seen through the lining from the ground. Yikes, guys. And it looks like they build a very sort of rough, messy nest using fine twigs. It says they can lay 3 to 6, commonly 4, and the shell is smooth and has a slight gloss. It can be pale gray, green, blue, or bluish. Only one brood, and both birds sing while incubating. Thank you for pointing me towards the rose-breasted grosbeak, because now I know they sing while they're incubating. That's so sweet. That's pretty cool. Grosbeaks are another bird that has an extremely large bill. It's one of the finches. Bills evolved for cracking seeds, so again, you would want some type of sunflower seed likely for these grosbeaks. All right, so I think we should do hummingbirds, and then I'll take a few more questions at the end. Hummingbirds are really, really lovely birds to have in your garden. We grow a lot of vegetables in our front yard. We dig up our whole front yard and plant tomatoes and all sorts of things. But we also plant scarlet runner beans, and those are a bean that produces, it's a dried bean, and honestly, we don't grow enough of them to, make a bowl of soup or pot of stew with them. But they have these really lovely salmon-colored flowers, and we get a ton of hummingbirds at them because hummingbirds, of course, drink the nectar. So there's tons of plants that produce nectar that would attract hummingbirds. Bergamot is another good one that we have. I know it's not specifically for hummingbirds per se. There's better plants for that, but we have bergamot in our yard to attract pollinators, and the hummingbirds like it too. And they don't only eat that; they'll also eat flies caught in spider webs. I've seen them doing that near my windows. They're super cool, but they build tiny, tiny nests. Let's see. The outside diameter of the nest is 1 to 1 3/4 inches. That is so small, and it's only 1 to 2 inches deep. Their eggs are tiny, 12.9 by 8.5 millimeters. It's like a Tic Tac. So this is a picture of a hummingbird nest. And let's see. It says it was 1 3/4 inches in diameter. That's, I guess it's hard to, I'll hold it next to my face. That big. That's very small. And they'll also cover their nests. The nest is built of plant down fibers, bud scales, and attached to a limb with spider's silk. It's lined with soft plant down and covered on the outside in greenish gray lichens that it attaches with spider's silk. Mostly it looks like a knot on a tree branch. It's very well camouflaged. The female builds it. It takes about 5 days. And that's just, it sounds like something out of a fairy tale, attached to the tree with spider's silk and covered in lichens. It's just nice. Also says male takes no part in nesting activity, and they are suspected to be polygamous, which means that the male has multiple females making nests at once, which is a cool breeding strategy. Let's see. They usually hatch after 14 or 16 days, and they possibly have 2 broods. That's really cool. Hummingbirds are, you can also have a hummingbird feeder. You can put one of those out and make your own nectar for them. Trick is, it's really important to make sure it's safe for the hummingbirds. So you can buy it if you want, but definitely find a nectar without a dye. And it's really easy to make it. It does not need to be red. A lot of the hummingbird feeders have some red on them because people think that hummingbirds are attracted by that. And you don't necessarily need that. They come to other colored flowers too. And honestly, the red on the feeder is more than enough. You don't need red dye in your nectar. So you can just mix sugar and water together. There's recipes online. Boil it up, let it cool, toss it in your feeder. And it's important to make sure that you're not getting a lot of ants in it. And it's also important to make sure it's not spoiling. So if it's in the sun and it's very hot out, you're probably going to have to change it every day. They recommend like 3 days max leaving your hummingbird feeder up for. And then you have to change whatever you have, whatever the nectar is left, you swap that out for more. Let's see. Someone asks, are hummingbirds usually in pairs, meaning I regularly see 3 at my feeder, and I'm wondering if there's a 4th one that I just don't see, or if these 3 are a grouping of some kind. Yeah, so the book said that the males don't usually help out at the nest, so it could be that in the area you have a male and 2 females, and the females have their own nests. It could be that, well, I guess you would know if they're males or females, right? Because they are sexually dimorphic. You can tell the males and the females apart. So basically they're not necessarily paired up. And there can be multiple hummingbirds visiting the same feeder, having territories nearby. Often there's competition at the feeders, so you'll see one of them chasing away the other ones, which is kind of fun to watch. And someone says that they made an ant moat on the pole with a hummingbird feeder, and it works great. Yeah, if you Google it, you'll be able to see suggestions for how you can build your own ant moat, and that will help keep ants out of your hummingbird feeder. Diana asks, what book am I referencing from? This is the Peterson's Field Guide to Eastern Birds' Nests. I love it because I love nests. And it's pretty good. It only has 1 picture per species, and that is often good enough, but because I've spent so much time studying nests, I know that there's so much variation in what the nests can look like and what the eggs can look like. So having only 1 picture irks me a little bit, but I also understand that this is, gosh, a field guide to all of the nests in Eastern North America. So it's a little hard to be more detailed than what they are. Any last minute questions in here? Someone else says, every year I have a robin's nest in my gazebo. We got rid of the nest after it left. Should I have left it up? Good question. Birds will typically build a new nest after, or if they're going to have another clutch of young. So once the chicks have left the nest and you are certain that they will not return, there's no activity near the nest, you can remove it from your human structure. You should leave it in nature though. Most birds in North America are protected. So you can't have their feathers, their eggs, their nests, their bodies, unless you have a permit. And Madison Audubon does have an education permit, so we are allowed to collect those things. If a bird has died, we can take it. And if an egg is, if it won't hatch, if the rest of the chicks have hatched and that one is left, we can take that. Same with a nest once that the parents are done with it. So if you don't have a permit like that, you cannot keep that nest in your house. It's better to just put it in your garden or out in your backyard, something like that. But once the nest is finished, you can remove it. Thank you for waiting until they were done. That was really lovely. Okay, I think, oh, what is my favorite bird guide for Wisconsin birds? It totally depends on what it's for. So personally, I really like the Sibley's Guide. I don't have one specific to Wisconsin birds. I know there are a few of them, but I don't personally use them just because I like having all the options. So I like Sibley's for me now. I like that it has many different ages and color morphs, and it shows hybrids, and it has information on like length and width and weight and wingspan, what they eat, what they sound like. It's got more information in it. When I was first starting out, I used the Peterson's Guide. It has fewer pictures per species, so it won't show all the molts, all the variations. So it's a lot easier to find a bird if it's what the bird typically looks like, which is usually what a beginner is looking for. And there's just a little less information, so it's more streamlined for when you're just starting. So both of those have pictures that are painted, which I prefer. Some people really like photographs of birds, and if you prefer that, I recommend the Kaufman Guide. That one's really nice. I like the layout, and I think they do a pretty good job with the photographs. So that was my answer for field guides. Okay, I think that is about all I have time for. It has been a fun class. If you have more questions, leave them in the comments. I'll try to get to it. I will try to post all of those links I talked about, and if I forget one, comment, and I'll try to go back and find it. All right, everybody, thanks so much. Take care.